Good evening, everyone. I'm Andrea Solomon, and on behalf of the entire Alumni Relations and Development team, it's my privilege to welcome you to another webinar in the Choate ConnectsUs series. We created this series to keep the greater Choate Rosemary Hall community connected during this time of social distancing. Next week, we'll have a conversation on education in these challenging times, featuring the president of Middlebury College, who is an alumna, and our head of school, Alex Curtis. Also upcoming, a conversation about the current challenges of social justice later in May. Tonight, we're going to have a conversation about sports during the current COVID-19 pandemic. We'll speak with 3 alums about the way this time of no sports is affecting us at the national and local level, and what the future holds. Tonight's discussion will be moderated by John Steinbreder, a member of the class of 1974. John is one of the founders of Global Golf Post, formerly a writer, reporter at Sports Illustrated, a prolific author, and a contributor to Masters.com. If you have questions during the discussion, please write them in the questions area, and if there is time, we will pose a couple of them for the panelists. Welcome, everyone.
Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Well, Angela, thanks so much, and it's really nice to be here. It's great to be doing this and to be doing it with such a great group of people here. I was impressed and marveled at their CVs when I looked them over. And the second thing that struck me after I did that was how much younger they are than I am. And both Charlie and Angela weren't even born by the time I graduated from Choate and moved on to college. But that notwithstanding, it's great to be here. And we chatted the other day and talked about the world of sports and what's going on right now in the era of COVID-19 and how difficult and different things are for our entire industry. And I guess, to start off, I'd like to start with George, if you don't mind, George, and talk a little bit, just the overriding view of what's been the impact of this on the world of sports right now, and just with leagues shutting down and tours shutting down, and what it's meant to the players, to the owners, to the fans, to the people who work in the arenas, and just give us a sense of the extent to which and how significant and big this shutdown has been.
Well, it's been very significant to those people in the industry. I mean, for the most part, the owners and the players are probably, economically in good shape, but there's a whole ecosystem around sports with thousands and thousands of jobs, billions of dollars of revenue that really is hard hit, and it looks like going to be hard hit, in my opinion, for 12 to 36 months. Why is that? Sports is in the live event business, and live events is a big part of sports, and that includes not just tickets, but suite sales, sponsorship, merchandise, food and beverage, and it's a huge part of the ecosystem. There's a whole ecosystem of industries around that. Let's take an example in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. When the Alabama Crimson Tide play a home game, it's $20 million a weekend. So when you don't play a game in Columbus, Ohio, or Madison, Wisconsin, or Knoxville, Tennessee, that has a real economic impact. So in terms of jobs, in terms of live events coming back, it's going to be tough, I think. And I think what you're going to see and what you're seeing is the leagues are trying to come back to maintain some revenue in terms of television. But they'll start with no live gates. So just a little preview for our viewers. I guess you'll see NASCAR roll out in May. You'll see the PGA Tour play in June. What's unique about the tour, while they won't have fans, they're going to have a full field. So it'll be like a majors almost every week for a while, which is unique. You'll see baseball try to come back in July. And remarkably, you see basketball and hockey saying they'll go all the way to August or September to finish the season. Really what they means is they're going to go to August or September to maintain that television revenue. And then of course you have the NFL, who I think, well, they'll announce their schedule shortly, is pretty determined to play. And of course, college football, I think, will either play in the fall on time or delayed, or in the spring. And college football, the economics around football are significant to athletics as a whole at a university.
One thing we've talked about, and I talked with all 3 of you about the other day, was how has sports adapted short term? And Angela, I'd love, just to speak with you a little bit about the in-home viewing experience and how that has changed, and what is that like, and what does that portend also looking ahead to the future as to how we consume sports in the way that people are consuming this webinar right now here with all of us in rooms and in our own homes.
Yeah, it's a massive behavioral change. So for those of you that don't know, I have a company called Sports Innovation Lab. We are market research just focused on the sports and tech industry. We've been saying for years that fans act differently. There's cord cutters, cord nevers, those that don't, typically consume sports just on TV, or can't afford to go to a game, or maybe they want to watch the Olympics or the Premier League and they're never going to get on a plane to go there. So there's been a transition overnight in viewing at home. The problem, to George's point, there's no live event. So what they're experiencing now is repurposing of content or creating interesting overlays and more communication, say athletes commentating on a prior game. But what we're going to see, we think long term, is a massive investment or adoption of technologies like over-the-top platforms and more digital social platforms. So viewers are still consuming. They're saying, I don't want to pay my cable bill because I'm not getting live sports. So that's a whole other issue. But the trend that I like is that it's forcing the hand of the sports industry to say, maybe it was a nice to have before, something we were thinking about or starting to dip our toe in the water. And this is not every organization, of course, but for the most part, now every organization is saying, how do we reach viewers at home? Because in the short term, they're not going to be watching live. And again, to some of the prior comments around some of the sports that plan on airing without fans, how do you enhance that experience? How do you make it feel like there's energy when there's no one in the venue? How do you, and again, technology, we believe, will be a big piece of creating that live experience at home, even though you might be in the foreseeable future watching a lot of sports without fans. We saw the WWE attempt it. Again, back to, they need to withhold or uphold their broadcast contracts. And, it was a little underwhelming, but maybe that was just a first foray into figuring out what this looks like. And a lot of companies are trying to figure it out right now.
Charlie, we were talking the other day about the NFL draft, which got its best ratings ever, with Roger Goodell holed up in his basement looking like Mr. Rogers with his cardigan sweater. And let's talk a little bit about things like that. I mean, how did that work? What can they do better? To Angela's point about the viewing experience, one of the hallmarks of the NFL draft is Goodell getting booed by all the draftniks, and that was the one thing that didn't come across, where the fans booing and the TV screens behind them, try as they may to have done that. But let's talk a little bit about what's happened, and also things like the Michael Jordan documentary, which has been aired right now and is getting a lot more attention probably than it would have gotten otherwise, and get a sense of how those things have done and what else can be done going forward.
To kind of go forward and what they were talking about, both Angela and George before, is what I'm trying to preach to my team is don't aspire for what was normal. And I don't like the term new normal because it sounds like a second-class citizen to what is about to happen. We just have to embrace what production and what covering content's going to be. Like to Angela's point, the last thing we did right before we left the lot was the Big East tournament was still going in New York City. That was already where they were saying no fans, and it was friends and family type thing. But so we put people in the first 3 rows. It wasn't perfect, proper social distancing as we do it now, but it really wasn't lacking that ambient that you've come to expect. And we were talking, John, about the studio shows I run. Is at the beginning when we wanted to bring them back, my boss Eric Shank said, this is going to be a debacle. It's not going to be up to the prestige and the quality that our fans expect. And I said, the reality is everybody's living how we're in this chat right now. So what used to be, and even the younger generation that we're aspiring to get as an audience, right, is this is their world. UGC is a lot more comfortable to them than old school traditional sports fan. So really embracing on take it as an actual phasing. So George mentioned NASCAR, that's coming back. That used to be produced by, call it 120 people to do it. Now we're going to do the first race with 35, I think, on site. The pit crews and the only people who are touching the cars are going to be touching the cars, and that's the only people who are on the track. Everybody else is going to be in suites, and it's just going to be the new normal of how we consume content. So to answer your longest answer to your question is, when we started coming back with these shows, I was dead set. It can't just be everything is being pulled off the air because of COVID-19. That's not what people are coming to watch a sports channel to consume, right? It's a diversion. That's what they're coming for. They want to be inspired. So then we started looking for, like, what can we possibly talk about? So then the draft was a big bet, right? There's the one thing we could look forward to and burn way too many hours on. And then you really saw that people are just yearning for any content that they could talk about and feel good about and remember that they're fans and call their dad and say, this is amazing, and the Giants got this pick, or as a Giants fan, calling and saying words I can't say on this webinar. But the whole thing was literally totally proven concept when you saw the ratings of not only that, but the shows around it. ESPN the next day, their studio shows that have been kind of dwindling, popped because people had something to talk about. And now we have a 10-part basketball document. It's MJ, whatever, that's great, and everybody loves him so much. But this is being treated like it's like Citizen Kane every week. Literally Monday to Wednesday, it's about what happened and bringing back Isaiah Thomas or talking about Dennis Rodman. And then Thursday through the airing, it's about what's going to happen. So that just lets you know people are just yearning for this to get to some form of normalcy. So whatever would be that lack of quality or normal engagement, I think will be offset by the fact that people are just dying to consume anything.
You know, George, I was curious, and with golf right now, they're going to have this live event on the 17th of May down at Seminole Golf Club, which is a very exclusive and very kind of unseen golf club and course for most people, with Dustin Johnson, Ricky Fowler. You know, there's some energy with that, and talk about sort of what golf is doing. I'm curious how you think people are going to react to that, because it's going to be the first live golf anybody's seen in some time, but also with the tour coming back, 4 tournaments without a gallery in June, and then hopefully, in their view, moving into a season with some fans. How's that going to work? How are they going to pull that off?
I think that event, that special event, I think people are dying for content, and so I think any content that's out there is going to get more attention than it ever would. You know, that event in mid-May probably wouldn't get a lot of attention in the old world. It's going to get a lot of attention, and it's probably, you know, part of the great part about it is, as Angela and Charlie mentioned, you'll have new technologies, you'll have production that you hadn't had before, and those things will probably go on beyond the pandemic. So I think that event's going to be more special. I think they're going to bring innovation to the event, and I think golf's got an incredible opportunity, because other than NASCAR, they're really going to be the only game in town, and they're going to put their best players forth every week. So they're going to have real drama, great playing, and I don't think in golf that the crowd, well, not insignificant, because who doesn't like a big gallery with all the people cheering? I think it's more manageable than something else. So I think the product itself and the quality of the players playing, it could be a real shot in the arm for golf, I think.
You know, and Charlie, just to go back, since we kicked it around the other day regarding Major League Baseball, let's say, or the NHL right now, and this Olympic Village concept of trying to conduct games in small communities with everybody kind of there on neutral ground. Talk a little bit about how that might work, and what do you think the appeal or the lack of appeal might be to a setup like that?
No, listen, and we were talking about, I think it's like a microcosm of everything that's really happening across the industry right now. There's so much more collaboration. We were talking about kind of like with agents and everything and whatnot. Like, it used to be these long negotiations and drawn out. Now it's like we're weirdly on the same team, just trying to get the product back on the field or the court or whatever it might be. So baseball is a really interesting one of that, is they're talking about doing a truncated season where, call it 80 games, the math just keeps on changing. Like, we keep on saying every hour is like a day and every day is a month now in this thing. But they're going to do a truncated season where you do like round robin, you ship 10 teams to a stadium, they play each other in a certain amount of games. They would have to be quarantined completely, like the Olympic Village mentalities, to ensure safety, because the real concern right now is if you bring MLB, for example, NASCAR is pretty safe, I think golf's pretty safe. But once you bring like a real stick and ball, we touch the same product sport back, and something were to go wrong, like if you look at what happened with the Utah Jazz, what happens now? So at the beginning of this, it was, we had one case, and then it was all of a sudden that day, it was the next day we were off the lot and let's look at this thing. Well, I think we're smarter, but we still, even when you take precautions, we're seeing that it didn't go down, it's just plateauing, right? So we have to have in place, like, what is our appetite for people they're going to get sick, especially as we start this. And I think the precedence could be really important. So doing the quarantining, I think, is the best, smartest way. I know it's hard on the players to leave, family and friends that long, but it seems to be where we're headed.
Angela, you and I also kicked around the idea of what it's like for the sports fan. I know as a writer who covers golf tournaments, I'm very leery about going back to tournaments, to media centers that are crowded with people, to just being in those sorts of environments. So what's it going to be like for the teams? And you talked about some really interesting stuff, I thought, about what teams can do now when you go to a stadium, go to arena, to sort of lessen the touches, to try to make it safer for them to go there and just feel relaxed and comfortable. Tell me what we're looking at now and also down the road in that regard.
Yeah, trust is the bottom line. How many times have you seen something on TV and you immediately think, wow, they're standing too close together? Like, we're just subconsciously thinking this way now. And so to say that you will willingly go into a massive venue knowing there's that many people around without the trust is what teams have to gain. So right now they're already thinking about how can we invest in cashless payments or digital ticketing or infrared cameras that can tell your temperature. There's all kinds of technology that will minimize touch, maximize crowd control, better understand where's the shortest bathroom or people congregating in an area. If in the case there is someone, can you trace back where that person was and who they interacted with? This is already happening in Asia. They're already willingly adopting these mobile platforms, and with WeChat and some of these Alipay, they can actually know where the fans are. It'll be a massive, again, behavioral shift for the US, if we're talking about this market, to say, I'm going to download an app on my phone to be able to be traced back, but now I'm going to get mobile alerts if something's happening, or I'll be able to, the team can tell me what to do safely and securely in case something's going on, both inside and outside of the venue. So there's all kinds of investment there. Again, my excitement is the digital infrastructure that has to go on and be invested in now, that we've said is necessary for all kinds of engagement or all kinds of sports betting. That was a nice to have before. You saw some teams and leagues doing it. Now it's a must have if you're going to adopt this kinds of safety technology. Now, whether those technologies interact with each other is another story, but the point is we're seeing a lot of people scratching their heads and putting teams together and thinking about how do we make it safe? Because yes, in the short term, we'll have sports so long as we're doing the proper things for the athletes and quarantine them and also protecting all the employees that are going to have to service these events. So if you can service the employees and the athletes and make people feel safe, we'll put on sports in the short term, and people, they'll adjust. They'll say, just like we're on this, Zoom, it's different. But in the long term, to get them to go into the venue, whether they're spaced 6 feet apart or they're sitting right next to someone in a packed venue, it's all about trust and safety and security. And so that's absolutely where the focus should be at for every league and team that's thinking about that.
George, I'm wondering about, and again, we were talking about the Masters the other day. There are few pieces of merchandise in sports like Augusta National or Masters logoed merchandise, and the merchandise facilities are getting jammed. They're absolutely, head to toe with people from their opening early in the morning to their closing at night. How does merchandising change with all of this? And are we going to see much more of a online and much less of that stuff, again, bringing people into crowded places like we once did, and making it, even Augusta National might have to, at least this year certainly, go to that, where badge holders are allowed to buy a certain amount of merchandise online, because I don't see how they run that merchandise facility in the current environment.
I think the whole, as Angela points out, the whole at-van experience is going to change. Certainly with merchandise, much more. No one's going to be waiting in line to buy merchandise. At Augusta, they are sandwiched in there, and those are narrow areas, aisles. But just even at an arena, I don't see people in line to buy merchandise. I think food and beverage, I think, experience in a suite would be quite different. I think acquiring food and the coronavirus landscape is going to be very different. So I think you are going to see a lot of adjustments to the at-event experience. And, first you'll go probably to no fans and potentially some fans. But again, you might see a stadium that could hold 100,000 people with 25,000 people with rows separating people and families being separated. I know the NCAA in terms of football has looked at that. And so I just think you're going to see a lot of innovation in terms of trying to bring some kind of an experience back, but it won't be the experience I think everybody's used to until there's a really good therapeutic or a vaccine. I think people will be cautious, and it's going to evolve. And as Charlie was saying, I mean, what we're thinking today, I mean, 6 weeks from now, who knows what the world looks like, good or bad. Let's hope it's good. But I mean, if you think back a month ago, you think very differently than you do today, or even 6-7 weeks ago. So it is really a moving target. I think one thing's for sure is that things are going to be different and people are going to be more cautious, and then that's going to require the operators of the teams and the facilities to be on their feet.
Angela, just to get to you on the Olympics, being a 4-time gold medal winner and a 4-time Olympian and a member of the hockey.
I just have one. I have 4 medals.
Oh, 4 medals.
That's amazing. It's incredible what you achieved.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about what happened with the Olympics this year and kind of what that means from an athlete standpoint, if you will, but also from a business standpoint, and what that reset and what they're trying to do for next year, having had to postpone until 2021. Give us some sense of what's involved in all of that and the impact and effects of that.
Yeah, I was an athlete and then spent 8 years on the International Olympic Committee on the executive board there. So, and part of the planning process for different events that's the biggest event in the world, right? It took longer for them to make that decisive decision, partially because of the economic impact. I mean, it's over $3 billion, I think, to Tokyo. The trickle-down effect is that the IOC now can't distribute its payments to all the international sports federations, which then distribute that to global sport or to the national Olympic committees and Paralympic committees. So you think about here in the US, that trickle-down effect to the youth sports and all that grassroots. So it's not just the athletes that are impacted, and I'll get into that in a second, or the fans. It's the brands now that maybe their sponsorship had expired or they had to renew, and we're in this no man's land in between, years on the broadcast side. So everyone is trying to figure out, and I think to Charlie's point, everyone's playing nice in the sandbox and trying to, come to a solution. The athletes, though, they were the ones that put their hands up and said, we're willing to delay on to be safe at the end of the day. If you're in close quarters with, athletes from all across the world, obviously there's different rates of COVID across the world. So they wanted to make sure, the athletes were safe. The fans are same situation, who's gonna get on a plane and want to be in that venue. So I still think the games will go on next summer. There's been some speculation that it could get canceled or delayed again. IOC president has said they won't delay it, and everyone's adamant that it'll go on. You may just not see fans in the stands again. Like, who knows how long this is going to happen. I think, again, my prediction is in a year we'll have figured out how to at least have the sporting event, certainly for those sports where there's less contact. I sit on the board of World Rugby, and that, you are touching and you're hitting, and so maybe there's not a vaccine, and then that's the case, the quarantine and all these safety precautions are going to be, very important. So massive impact to global sport with just the delay. If there's a cancellation, that'll force a lot of federations into bankruptcy, national Olympic committees that rely on that funding. So it's not good for anyone, but I'm optimistic that it'll go on, and the athletes again are having to figure out a way to train at home or make it work. And at the end of the day, I think everyone will celebrate these games if we're able to pull them off. Similar to how we're, consuming Michael Jordan right now, if we're able to actually, as the world, come together around the Olympics as an athlete that, brought home a gold medal and saw that inspiration. I actually was a senior at Choate when I did that, so I got the whole school behind me. But I think if we're actually able to pull these off, it'll be one of the most special Olympics ever.
I'm curious, just to follow up with you as an athlete, how difficult is it for people to train in this sort of environment? Like Charlie, I'm a Giants fan and watching the NFL draft, and they're supposed to be having rookie camp right now, and they're all doing it as we're doing this. And I'm just, how do they train, and how well can they train in these sorts of conditions?
Yeah, there's a lot, again, of tech that's allowing them to stay connected. You can, I mean, I'm wearing a Whoop, tracks your recovery, and you see the NFL, a lot of these guys, that's one of the companies they've partnered with at the NFLPA level at least. So there's a lot of technologies, I'm sure a few people have Pelotons or things that allow you to digitally track. So it's hard, I'm not gonna lie, and I think it depends on the sport. So you can use tech to create data that can help your coach or your trainer, better coach you. You can watch videos and things that some teams are providing. At the end of the day, I'm an ice hockey player, and there's no ice where I'm at. So you're, again, going to be training in your basement and just doing your off ice. I think, and another point on the Olympic level, countries vary in terms of stay-at-home policies at this point. So that's another factor, is if you had some athletes returning to play and able to train or not without the restrictions, it's putting an unfair advantage. So it's hard across the board. But again, I'm the optimist that this is going to help athletes in general better understand their bodies, and if they can get through this, because it's hard, mentally hard on so many of them. We'll see changing in training regimens moving forward.
And just to wrap it up before we go to the Q&A and go around the horn here, talk a little bit, Charlie, starting with you. What are some of the things you might see happen that kind of remain permanent when this is done in sports as a result of this? George and I are talking about shorter seasons. Is this something that finally gets some of the leagues to say, hey, do we really need to bring people in the NHL or the NBA or WNBA in for this many games every year? So if all three of you, starting with Charlie, just give me a sense, what are some things we might see made permanent that come out of this difficult time?
It's hard to say like it's an optimistic time right now, or I have an optimistic viewpoint, but the analogy I gave you as like an athlete is like, it feels like you trained your whole life and you got into like the championship game and you're down 21-0 in the first quarter. That's what is happening right now. So like, there's two ways to do it. You can just like fold and get blown out and keep your head down and live like that for the rest of your life, or you fight and you try to get back in the game. That's what I think the mentality of what we're doing right now. So like, to what George was echoing earlier, is we're just going to have to learn every second. And so I think it's going to be so tough this first year because there'll be such a dearth of content whenever that day happens or that season happens, as we were talking about. Like, you're going to have, as we were talking about, 2 masters within 6 months. Somebody could win 2 masters in a 6-month span. And at the same time, Jim Nantz is supposed to be calling a Sunday football game. So all of this stuff is going to be going on at the same time. And then I don't think we're going to learn enough from that first season. I think we really have to figure out what the learns are, kind of cost efficiencies. The one thing for me that I really learned is just how fickle the whole thing was, right? The spread was just not as big as you would think on something so enormous as sports. And as a Fox employee, we're part of the problem. Our rights packages are so big that to pay for them, we have to live at this high level. I think over time, that's going to have to right size itself. And whether we talked about, with NASCAR coming down from 120 to 40 in production, we're going to have to get really smart. And as Angela was saying, we're going to have to use technology, which a lot of people who are legacied in our industry know one way to do content, and I think that's completely gone. And so the people who are smartest and can come up with these ideas during this crazy, frenetic 6-month period as we re-enter, you're going to see a lot of really good bosses looking at the things that are working, as we are talking about sharing. Like, this is the first time where I'm talking to the head of content at ESPN. We ignore each other for sport to not share anything. Now it's like me begging for rights to some of the Jordan doc because I'll promote his content. So I think like that level of like humanity is really going to stick, and that should be what we focus on. There's so much negativity. It just has to be like, just get 3 points on the board when you're down 21-0.
George?
Well, I think a couple on the positive side. I think what Charlie and Angela are pointing to is reinvention in terms of presentation in the business model, in terms of content presented, and then technology. I think is going to be embraced further and faster. There's probably going to be more cord cutting. So I think the innovation digitally and through technology will be successful. And then lastly, as we talked about, John, you know, Steve Coonan was the president of the Atlanta Hawks, and last year he said, you know, the season should really start at the end of December to June. And so you do wonder in your head, do you need 162 baseball games? Do you really need, you know, John and I were talking when I was growing up, the NBA was 2 out of 3 and 3 out of 5 and 4 out of 7. Those games were better, right? And if you had a single elimination, so I think, and you saw Adam Silver this year begin to talk about tweaks to the format. So I think one of the great things that could come out of this would be some new formats that might last beyond the virus. And then on the negative side, I hate to be negative, but there's no way to overstate the economic dislocation and the pain that this is going to cause, particularly in sports. Sports is like the airline industry, the hotel industry, every aspect of the ecosystem. You know, take baseball, 70 million tickets. Last year was one of the worst years selling tickets for baseball and the NFL. So going into this, ticket sales were hard. Baseball depends on ticket sales. Hockey depends on ticket sales. College football depends on ticket sales. Major League Soccer depends on ticket sales. NBA and NFL, not as much. The selling of tickets in the next 12 to 36 months is going to be significantly less and more difficult, and all the associated revenue streams and businesses and industries. And that's going to create a lot of dislocation. Dislocation in franchises, valuation. Some of these franchises and some of these sports didn't cash flow positive going into the virus. And then as we've talked about in college sports, the college sports is going to get hit hard because even if you play all the games and you don't have the attendance, you know, college football in the top 65 programs in the country generate on the low end $50 million per school to a high end of 150. That's somewhere between 3 and 9 billion. So let's say it's 5 to 7. More than half of that is ticket related. You know, every other sport, MLS taking a 50% pay cut, basketball 20 or 25, NHL, baseball, they won't play the games unless you cut the salary costs because they can't afford it without the tickets. There's nobody to take pay cuts in college sports. College football underwrites all the other sports and supports the universities at a time when universities are going to be under tuition challenges like they've never been before, student fee challenges, and state funding challenges. And that money is not going to be there. So the question is, if it's it used to be 6 billion, is it 4 billion? What happens? And so there's just no way to, you know, people that aren't in it every day like us, you know, you think about the players and the teams and when my team comes back, but you know, there are a lot of people going to lose jobs. Jobs aren't going to come back, and it's going to be very, very difficult going forward. I'm not happy to say that. I like to talk about it though, because I think people kind of are not denying the reality of the situation. There's going to be a massive economic hit, and it's not going to be to the owners and the players. It's going to be to everybody else in the ecosystem. And I do think as people, we have to start talking about that so we can address it proactively.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Angela, what do you see long-term of some of the results and some of the things that stick with us after the pandemic abates and we get a vaccine, or assuming these things will happen in a timely fashion?
Yeah, well, on the positive, I think certainly a lot of the innovation. I just, again, the rate of change was sort of this in the sports industry, and I think it's going to do this. Again, out of necessity. So business model change, adoption of technology, the ability to cooperate. We're all in it together. So one thing is venues that survive, that have the capital to invest and do the things I was discussing, will look more like smart cities, right? They won't just be a traditional bricks and mortar. They really will be, you know, cities, if you will, and have that infrastructure in place. I think media will evolve, and it won't just be, again, broadcast. It'll be a combination of broadcast, social, digital, and live event. Will all come together and be distributed in new and innovative ways to what the fans actually want. So that's a really good thing. And not that the fans don't want the traditional broadcast today, but they're moving so quickly. I think this, again, will accelerate that. To the negative, I really believe, to George's point, it's going to have massive effects. spoke beautifully on the professional level. At the youth level, we're going to see some major youth sports don't have the pockets. They're volunteers. It's day to day. So I'm very fearful for not only, 90%. I think Val Ackerman told me the other day, 90% of the NCAA budget comes from the March Madness tournament alone. So all the other sports, women's sports, these Olympic sports at the NCAA level, I'm fearful of budget cuts there. I'm fearful of the trickle-down effect, as I mentioned before, to the federations, the National Olympic Committees, and down to youth sports. I think you're going to see a lot of localization of, Little League and some of these more local sports before we have a vaccine. So less international or state travel. Localization of youth sports. So in the long run, certainly those that have the pockets and have the nimbleness to adapt and adopt, a new way of doing things will survive. But in the short term, it's sad. And kids at the end of the day who don't have heroes to look up to, I'm really fearful. Again, they don't have people on, in sports to look up to. The one thing I love about sports, or have the ability to go outside and actually be active. I mean, that's again another repercussion. Even when they're able to, if they're sitting at home and they're not actually having that social interaction, if it's 1 or 2 years before we can really do this, again, that youth level, I'm fearful of as well.
Well, that's great. Thank you all so much. And Angela, I think, or Andrea, I think it'd be great to take some questions if people would like to ask our panel a few things.
Sure thing. Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to point out that George Pyne, it says Ruth Ann Snelson, but that's because he's logged in as Ruth Ann. So that is George Pyne, class of '84. Just want to, not have everyone be confused. George, actually, this is a question for you from a classmate, Dennis Alpert. What's been the impact on the investment in sports / entertainment projects, businesses as a result of this pandemic?
Well, I think, again, companies that were over leveraged and that rely on events have been hard hit. I mean, Endeavor is a big firm that has significant leverage on it, produces probably 10 events a day, is a hard hit firm. Learfield that sells, has like 3,500 employees in college sports marketing business is being heavily hit. I think you see, we have 5 businesses ourselves. One of them's a live event business. It's hit hard. So I think those people that were highly leveraged and exposed to events are in tough shape. I mean, Live Nation was in tough shape. So I think businesses that were highly leveraged in trouble, businesses event related in trouble. And then of course, we just raised $700 million in our company to buy companies in the fall. So companies now, people that have capital and capability are probably going to find some good opportunities, unfortunately, in the future, because I think the demand for capital is going to be quite high. And there will be a lot of attractive opportunities because you're going to have a lot of people facing challenging situations, which I'm not happy about. Having grown up in the business for 30 years, it breaks my heart. So it's going to be an interesting time. I think, again, it'll take a little time for it to play out, but it's probably 6 to 36 months. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs, and I think it'll be pretty choppy. It's been a little early as everyone's taking their breath, but even you think about Disney, who the NFL was going to market with their rights, and they said, "Hey, we're going this summer." I don't know about going. You have Disney in difficult shape, Viacom in difficult shape, and some other. AT&T just switched out their CEO. So I think, again, even on the media side, while sports remains highly valuable, there's going to be dislocation there. It's probably not a good time to go to market. So it's like everybody else, it's very choppy, and I think the future is a little bit uncertain. Now, I have to be positive for a second. America is resilient. People are resilient. We'll pivot and figure it out. Between here and there, I think you better strap your helmet on. I think it's going to be challenging.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, another one. Does the current touchless environment create new opportunities for platforms that marry fan engagement with commerce and data without geographic boundaries? And do you find that teams may be more open to trying or investing in this area than they have been in the past? That's to anyone.
Angela.
I could take that if you want.
Great.
The number one question we got asked, we're a market research company again, around venues before this was who's in my venue? Like literally, if you can't customize and personalize everything in your business to the customer, you're generically trying to sell. And so one way that, again, you can do that is again, through this thing. And so a lot of this was through the Teams apps and opt-in. So yes, to that entire question, yes, yes, yes. Again, to George's point, it's a lot of capital. Right now, everyone's just trying to, weather layoffs and figure out, what's going on, what's left to right. So I think in the long term, yes, you'll see this massive opportunity, and some will come through it. Investing in this and having the ability to know who's in the building and activate all these amazing touchless and fan engagement and be able to give more value to the sponsors and the brands and their whole portfolio of partners. But that again is in the long term. So again, I'm bullish that that's where we're headed anyway. And if you have capital to spend, like, go for it. And that's where fans want to be anyway. It will make the whole ecosystem better. But to George's last comment, like, it's not a pretty picture right now. So if venues, if some of these, like Monumental Sports is a great example. They did this before COVID hit. They were about to activate a bunch of stuff, and now they have to take a step back. But coming out of this, they're in a really good position to win. So yes, I would like to see that happen. I think it will happen for those that can weather the storm. And by the way, it's going to be a great experience for fans across the board. I think in a few years when we get through this and everyone's safe, I really think it'll take fan engagement, which is such a broad term. You'll actually see specific ways that that the whole ecosystem is able to connect to that person in a very personalized way, which is what every other industry has really tapped into. And it's been very latent for the sports industry, which now I think, again, is that opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Great. Outside of the major sports leagues who can, have the funds to ensure safety and all the costs associated with it, how will youth sports and facilities throughout the country have the money to implement those safety measures?
I mean, I can try if you want. I was on the board of the U.S. Olympic Committee. Every local entity is its own jurisdiction. Every national sports federation, like USA Hockey or USA Rugby or whatever the sport is, will dictate what the rules are, similar to how the states operate, where whoever the governing body will be able to dictate that. So right now it feels like the wild, wild west. I don't have an answer, but it's scary because you're going to have different jurisdictions and different levels saying this is safe and this isn't. I ultimately hope the government steps in and creates some real strict guidelines for youth sports, because in every other country there's actually a sports minister. We don't have that here in the U.S. It's a different kind of setup. So I think what you're seeing, state to state governors figure it out. I really hope at the federal level we have some guidelines for safety for our kids in the future. I don't know if anyone, Charlie or George, you guys want to.
I want to add one thing to that, which is spot on. I think if you look at some of the research they're saying, like where some of the countries who were affected by SARS, for example, and then they're not as negatively impacted by COVID-19 because they had a playbook and they weren't like figuring it out as we are as a country or states. They knew what they had to do to just take what the pandemic was going to do. I think that's what we really need one league to get right, even though we're talking about pro sports versus youth sports, because as the question rightly identified, pro sports have the money to figure it out right. So then you can take, if one of these leagues gets it right, let's say baseball, for example, does it right in this weird new quarantine world, it's, you know, traditionalists won't love, but it'll be getting the product back on, and there aren't big, you know, colonies of hits of this, then that could hopefully help inform what the youth organizations should do as well. So I really think this is, you know, it's always the case, but I feel like athletics and pro sports really has that opportunity, as you were saying with Goodell earlier, to redefine themselves right now. It's not about like branding and marketing, but just do the right thing and try to take care of people. So sharing information, getting best practices down, passing it down the line, and then hopefully that could lead to a resurgence in youth being safe again.
Okay, how about one more question? Do you think that the increased use of the digital platforms to increase fan interaction, push some of those sports, will push some of those sports who have not embraced sport betting to move in that direction?
I think that one of the things with 30 million people out of work that I think you have to watch here is the cord cutting. You know, how long are people going to pay those cable bills? And particularly even on the regional sports network. And when you look back to 08 and 09, when they had a difficulty, there were businesses were kind of in transition and accelerated the change. I think a fair thing to watch here is, the things change here, as Angela had pointed out earlier, towards technology. It was headed that way, but does the virus and the economic ramifications of the virus push those things along? I think the answer is probably yes. I think it will enhance gambling. It will enhance other data-related things. It will enhance the relationship a team or a league has with the consumer. So I think that a positive part of the pandemic will be, I think it will accelerate the digital world and digital innovation. I don't think it's going to replace TV by any means, but again, with 30 million Americans out of work and really pretty good digital options, I do think it's an interesting time to see what impact that has on cord cutting and enhancing, the digital elements out there.
Great. Okay.
Was that it, Angela? I mean, Andrea, we all set?
Yeah, thank you, George, Angela, Charlie, and especially you, John, for a very informative and interesting conversation this evening. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and please stay tuned for future online programming in our Choate ConnectsUs series. Stay healthy, everyone, and take care of each other.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,